is Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that examines aspects of sound and image-based cultural production. I'm the creator and host, Paula Blair. I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Shail to talk about Gold. Do we have a subtitle for this film, Dr. Shail?
Always believe in your soul? How does it go?
The actual subtitle for the film. It came up in the cinema, but it's not on a page for it, is it?
Well, the tagline is "The dream that united our nation," and that
came up in the cinema.
It's a theme that's going to run throughout what we're discussing today.
Yeah, we need to pick that one apart.
So our nation is the Republic of India. Now,
I'm not finished with a thing.
Okay, finished. I'll move my...
And Gold is a film dramatisation and fictionalisation of the true story of India's gold medal winning field hockey team at the 1948 Olympics, hosted in London, otherwise known as the Austerity Olympics, as no new facilities were built in the post-war economy. For India, it was also their first Olympic Games as an independent country. They had previously entered as British India and been winning medals on behalf of Britain. It was also the first games for both India and Pakistan post-partition. Now you can go on your nation ramble.
Okay, this is part of an ongoing project by you and I.
Is it?
To go and see films which we wouldn't ordinarily go and see, in part because we're not seeing trailers for them habitually in any of the media outlets that we are exposed to on a regular basis, and they're not being reviewed by the reviewers whose reviews we tend to listen to because
they're not press screened.
Because they're not press screened, right? And you know, this may change, because I would love to hear what people who are reviewing stuff that's coming from European and North American film industries think of films like this. So it's called Gold, which of course is...
It's a bit of a spoiler already, isn't it? Because you know what the end point is going to be of the film.
Yes,
it's just more about the getting there in the narrative.
Now let's get this out of the way. Field hockey, we didn't think it would be quite so sexy, but field hockey...
They make it pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty sexy. So this is a film that we saw at the Odeon Metro Centre across the river in Gateshead. The Metro Centre Odeon, it has this habit of putting on the occasional subtitled foreign language film.
They do tend to be Indian films, though.
Yeah, this is something we learned when we were briefly in Bradford recently, which is that at the Odeon in Bradford, they actually show a lot more subtitled foreign language films from South Asia, including ones that are in Urdu and ones that are in Bengali, in addition to ones that are in Hindi. The one that we saw, Gold, the Our Nation is India. It's primarily in Hindi. Of course, there's lots of bits where people lapse into English. When we go and see these kinds of films, it's actually only the second one that we've deliberately gone to see at the Metro Centre, which seems to be... I'm not going to call it a Bollywood film because that's got connotations I don't want to bring in.
But that's how it was.
Well, yes, because it's a Hindi film, second one we've seen at the Metro Centre, and themes already are beginning to emerge. We go knowing that cinema going in South Asia is not an utterly different social experience from what it is here, but there are some elements of it that differ quite substantially.
Yeah.
We go knowing, for example, that talking during the screening is much more widely accepted in India than it is here, and therefore that our strict adherence to what is known as the code will need to be briefly suspended while we do this. Not that we're going to talk and eat and make phone calls during the film, but that we have to be fine with our fellow humans doing this.
I can cope with to an extent. It's just we got sitting in front of some young people who incessantly ate sweets from the loudest packaging on the planet.
Cultural difference. But yes, after I was
for 2 solid hours.
After I started to go, look, please, I'm trying to watch.
Just 5 minutes. Just a break. Just a break from it. That's all we want.
Alright, so that was...
But we should have moved.
Another thing that I suppose is worth studying is when you get a ticket to sit in a specific place, and then other people come along and the person at the desk at the front of the cinema goes, this is where everyone else is going to be sitting, where do you want to sit? Of course, you're assuming that whoever's bought a ticket before you is actually going to sit where they've got a ticket for. But no, none of that. So everyone just sat at the back. And we deliberately sat at the back and off to one side so as to be...
a bit inconspicuous as the only white people in the room.
And of course our conspicuousness as the only white people in the room drew the attention of the person who was selling us the ticket, because I said, can we have 2 grown-up tickets for the 7 whatever showing of Gold? And she went, you do know it's a Bollywood film, don't you? And I enthusiastically went, yes. Because of course we were the wrong colour of person to go and see this film. The fact that the Metro Centre Odeon shows seemingly just Hindi films as its subtitled foreign language films, it tells you something about what audience they think they are able to get from the surrounding area. And there were about 30 people in there, all of whom except for you and I seemed to be of recent South Asian origin. Another thing which I suppose we ought to get at while we're on the subject of the slight difference between this cinema-going experience and that you get if going to see a film like Infinity War or Black Panther.
Yeah, Western Anglophone commercial cinema.
Yeah, there's a range there because people were talking and doing stuff on their phone to an annoying degree during Wonder Woman, for example.
I had a confrontation.
You had a thing. So there's a spectrum there because we also, during A Quiet Place, not a single other person said a single word to my recollection during A Quiet Place.
I had a horrible time during that film because there were people behind us having a full-on catch-up.
They were?
Yes.
Oh, right. Well, that's how engrossed in the film I was then. Okay.
Well, I was trying to be, but they kept pulling me out, and then people kept standing up and knocking over the glasses that they shouldn't have had in the screen.
I remember that bit. That bit was
rustling their bags.
So, okay, name a film where
they would die if that was real.
Yeah, in that story space. Name a film where people were generally quiet that we've seen recently.
Probably the best behaved audience we've had for a while has been Leave No Trace. Wasn't too bad. That was bearable.
There's only about
it was okay.
20 people there.
No, there was even less than that. There was less than 10 of us.
To stick with the experience of being in the auditorium.
Well, there's that, but also I think it's worse because the first Hindi film that we saw was Tiger Zinda Hai.
Yes.
That was quite raucous, and that's an action movie. It had serious themes in it, but it was not intended to be fully serious either. It had comic relief, and it knew what it was doing. I think what I'm really enjoying about the Indian films is that they're very aware of cinematic language and they're very playful with it. So you had these full-blown action scenes, so you had people taking selfies with the film and selfies with their friends throughout the film and just generally having a good time, and I kind of embraced the raucousness of the crowd, and that was quite a big crowd for that one. The cinema was maybe half full for that, and it's quite a big screen, and the noise didn't really bother me because I was swept up in the actioniness, and of course it's action, so it was really loud, it was explosions, it was shouting. I think with this one it was more, I was finding it difficult to concentrate because there was lots of different languages being used. It was hard to follow. Of course this is a time in India as well where they're coming out of not just colonial rule but the country's splitting apart, it's fracturing, and so there's a lot of different languages to keep up with, and then people are slipping into English at times. You needed to concentrate on things that were being said, and then of course you're aware that you're losing things in the translation and the subtitles, but the subtitles need to be accurate enough because that's the common language. English is going to be the common language anyway in this region. I didn't really mind so much the talking. The phones I could kind of put up with. It was that constant, I cannot stress how constant the rustling actually was. There was no break in it. There was just a lot going on in that film.
It was quieter, there was more drama in it, and there was more reading in it. Particularly during there was a montage sequence which was about, they rattled through the Second World War, India's experience of the Second World War, during which there's music going on with lyrics, and so we're getting italicized text translating the lyrics and music, at the same time as getting newspaper headlines as a way of getting us quickly through the Second World War. Reading two sets of stuff at the same time was quite tricky. So the last thing about the experience of being amongst that cinema audience in that particular cinema auditorium that I wanted to point out was, and this of course, spoiler alert, reveals how the film ended. In the 1948 Olympics they change a lot of things about what actually happened, but they don't change this. India does win the men's field hockey in the 1948 Olympics. In fact, it's just the field hockey because there's no women's field hockey at the time. India does win, so they get a gold medal, the entire team, and there's a sequence when the Indian national anthem is played over the hoisting of the flags. The culmination of the narrative is quite powerful. I was feeling this is really quite a heartfelt ending, this is great stuff. So I was into it, but two guys two guys stood up for the national anthem.
I thought there were women as well who stood for it.
Right, some people stood up for the national anthem. This apparently is a thing in cinemas in India, which is that the national anthem will be played in advance of the film playing, and everyone stands up, and it's quite a matter of not just pride but expectation that people will stand up for the national anthem. You are always referring to me as your colonial oppressor, but at that particular moment, well, I think you count as colonial oppressor too, thing that has been stopping you from telling these kids to stop making noise throughout the entire film.
Hey, it was in my house,
a total crescendo. There was a whole lot of, we're not here going on, including that standing for the national anthem. I found myself thinking, what would I do if somebody demanded that I stood up for another country's national anthem? Because I could just go, hey, mate, I'm not standing up for any country's national anthem.
Not even my own.
I don't really, not even my own. I don't really do nationhood unless I have to. But
in a way, though, it's
maybe just standing
respectful,
would be.
but it was quite a rousing moment. More the film leading emotionally. I was feeling like, oh, should be stand up.
Yeah.
But you check yourself and you go, well, that wouldn't be appropriate.
That was a whole world of A wouldn't be appropriate, B wouldn't be appropriate, C wouldn't be appropriate. It would end with
We're just basically not
appropriate.
here.
Yeah, we're not
Yeah.
here.
We're just here to see the film.
Well, we were
learn.
the only people who sat all the way through the credits. Kudos to us.
That's true. I didn't concentrate on them as much as I normally would because I just felt really drained from all that crackling noise going on behind me.
Yeah.
We should have moved.
And it was a long film, and I suppose we ought to point this out
The
too.
interval.
Had a 20-minute, I think, intermission. I was actually doing very specific timings in my little notebook as we went along. So yeah, I think altogether it was 2 hours, not counting the intermission. No, 10-minute intermission. 2-hour film, I think.
We've talked quite a bit about our viewing conditions in the film. The film itself, there's quite a lot of issues. So I think just to outline a few quickly, thinking about colonialism, post-colonialism and neo-colonialism, and I think that post-prefix is one that I've been preoccupied with for quite a while, coming from a post-conflict place that's also on one hand post-colonial and on the other still colonial, so that will be interesting to think about. Also the religious and racial identities, there's a really big mixture of people from different backgrounds, as well as the regional tensions in the film. There's Hinduism, but also there's Sikhism, Buddhism, Islamism and Parsi is mentioned.
Yeah.
The role of women, or maybe even the practical non-existence of women, only when it's, I think the main character's wife is actually a pinnacle of the narrative, but she's still so sidelined and marginalised. So things like arranged marriages and money and the blessing that the wife does, so I think we should think about those sorts of things. Prohibition and alcohol. The idea of Bollywood, because we're not really, I mean, who are we anyway, because neither of us are experts in film from this area of the world. I don't know very much about Bollywood anyway, but you do get the song and dance element in the film that you come to expect from what we would typically associate with Bollywood cinema. And also flags, one of my favourite topics as well.
Because they're such a warm and fluffy element of
the
politics of Northern Ireland, aren't they?
Yes, indeed. Right, so first of all, just on a personal level, I really enjoyed the experience of watching the film.
Yeah.
I found it really fun, really engaging, really clever. It was clever in the way it was told. It's quite funny a lot of the time, but it hits you pretty hard as well because, of course, there's a lot of violence, the country's splitting apart. There's a lot of hatred between Hindus and Muslims, and the Sikhs seem to be caught in the middle of all this. People from the Punjabi region, or it comes across in the film, they seem to be put down by everybody.
And there's class conflict amongst the Sikhs. It's brave for the amount of time that it covers, because it starts off in 1936. The Indian team as British India have just won the men's field hockey for the second or even the third time running, and so they're winning for Britain. Britain's relying on them to do it. Britain's not bothering to field teams, according to the story at least. And then we have the 1940 Olympics being cancelled, and that's a really big frustration, and the 1944 Olympics being cancelled, and then finally we get to 1948. So this film does cover over a decade, during which people slightly age. I'll give them that. They put a little bit of grey in various characters' hair. So Parsi is another word for a particular group of Zoroastrians in India. I had to look this up. This is something I studied when I was a student, but have not since. For its overall structure, I thought this is really working. It's having a kind of idyllic beginning, but one was just saying, look how well this field hockey team is doing, but the aim is to do this well as independent India. So there's a position of deficiency relative to the aim we want to achieve. And then mixed into that, we've got the amount of time it takes to get another field hockey Olympic contest to play in is a constant frustration to our main character, who's called Tapan Das. And they call him Bengali. The other characters call him like it's a nickname. They say, Oi Bengali, come in. So he's from the east of, at the time, what is India, and what of course would become, or part of Bengal would become part of Bangladesh, which initially was East Pakistan after partition. Tapan Das, he has to wait all this time, and we can see his character begin to crack under the pressure of having to wait for so long, basically becomes an alcoholic. And then there's the challenge of, okay, now this country's been through a war, and everyone who played in the last field hockey tournament is now probably too old, so we have to put the team together from scratch. And one of those classic reversals where Tapan Das, having got permission to put this team together from Mr. Wadia, seems to be the one who makes the decisions as part of the Indian Olympic management. Once he finally starts to put the team together, he does so quite successfully and quite quickly, and then partition occurs, and as a result they have this hemorrhaging of members from the team. So the first one is that everyone who's a Muslim fears for their own safety and flees to the nearest city that's going to be part of Pakistan, so they flee to Lahore. This is all played out quite obviously with Tapan Das scratching names off his list. So they lose Muslims, they lose also the Anglos. This is something which I didn't really notice, that some of the members have English names. One's called James Cullen, for example. Some members of the team, as they're putting it together, have these English names, and they all seem to decide that they're not going to be safe in post-independence and post-partition India as well, and so they all move to Australia. The big damage to the team is not just they've lost all these people, that they've also lost the captain, who is Imtiaz. And it had just not occurred to me, looking at these people's names, that some of them were Hindus and some, I knew, okay, definitely these people are Sikhs because they have their hair in these little top knots. But that person must be a Muslim because it's to do with naming. I didn't make that assumption. But then clearly, boom, the film just splits the team up completely and goes, you just can't have these people in the team anymore. But then, of course, some of those people who end up as Pakistani citizens, because effectively what the film says is all these people would remain citizens of India, whether they're Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, or Anglos, or Parsis, whatever they are, they would all remain citizens of India. It's just suddenly this contagion has taken hold inside of India where no one who's not a Hindu or a Sikh is safe. And so they have one of these instances of a Hindu crowd trying to kill Imtiaz, the Muslim captain of this team, and it's only because various other members of the team help that they manage to save his life. I mean, he's drenched in petrol and he's about to be set on fire. It's going to be horrific.
It's a pretty brutal scene.
So this is the low point of the film, both because this is the partition of India amongst interfaith violence, and also the hockey team is now down to about 4 people who have deemed it okay to still stay in India. And I suppose this is one thing which instantly reminded me of Tigers in Dahai, in spite of the fact that these are very different films. This film regards partition as the worst possible thing that could ever have happened to India. It regards it as this scar that needs to be remedied to the extent of reunifying Pakistan with India. It envisions an India which still contains Pakistan and Bangladesh. And so their rendition of the various rounds of the Field Hockey Olympics contains both the Indian team and the Pakistani team. These teams put together at the very last minute following partition, just about whipped into shape. But then again, so's the British team as well, just about whipped into shape.
And they haven't fielded their own team for 20 years.
In spite of this all being a very last minute thing, the Indians and the Pakistanis, they give a really good account for themselves.
Yeah, they're in the top 4.
They're implicitly both trying to do exactly the same thing. What it points out is that the Indians will be completely fine if the Pakistanis got their gold medal, and the Pakistanis are delighted that the Indians get the gold medal. It's this picture of India-Pakistani cooperation.
Yeah, they both win either way.
And that tells us a little something about the way that the Indian film industry views India's relationship with Pakistan at the moment, which is that it's doing its damnedest to be conciliatory when there are significant tensions between
conciliatory, but also we're a bit better than you though.
We do have to add this, that in both of these Hindi films that we've seen recently, we're brothers, but I do think you ought to know that India is the bigger brother and the slightly better brother. There's one thing I want to clarify as a characteristic of this film is that I thought, okay, so this is a historical piece of fiction, so what we should expect to find is that these are historical versions of real people, and so they ought to have the same names as these real people. But I had a quick look at who played in the 1948 field hockey at the Olympics, and not a single person whose name was mentioned in the film as being a member of any of these field hockey teams at the 1948 Olympics appeared in this film. The team from India, every single person on the list here of who actually played, none of their names appear in this film. Some similar surnames, for example, something like 5 members of the Indian hockey team at the time, their surname was Singh, but that's by far and away the most common name for people from the Punjab, so it's not surprising that that's a bit of an overlap. But no, the actual characters, completely fictional. Only the India won gold at the 1948 Olympics for field hockey, only that was historically accurate.
There was a disclaimer at the start of the film to say that it was fictional. All of the people are fiction.
If I remember correctly, it just did the standard, everyone's fictional,
Yeah.
any resemblance to anyone living or dead is probably coincidental. It didn't say based on a true story, even though it is based on a true story.
It's just that one part of the story, the big part, the main part of the story.
Yeah.
It's an imaginary of it, really. I think that in itself is interesting. I think in terms of a lot of different nations all over the world, if they're in some kind of post-transitionary phase still, and there's a question mark over when does that phase ever end? When are you not post-conflict? When are you not post-dictatorship? When are you not transitioning from these things? When are you not transitioning from a partition? When do you become that thing? So there's that hanging over it always. With a place like India and then Pakistan as well, with them being both of them at the same time post-colonial and post-partition, this is the time to imagine the past, reimagine the past, reinvent the past, retell the past, rehistoricize, but there's no claim to truth here, and it's an entertaining story, and it's a story that's probably quite rousing, possibly in a nationalistic sense, in a patriotic sense, I suppose in a nice way, because it's sport rather than, sport anyway is pretend conflict, but with something like field hockey, certainly at that time, doesn't have the connotations of violence that a lot of other sports would come to have later on. Yeah. There's sportingness about it.
And they do make quite a clear point of showing crowds in the 1936 Olympics.
In Berlin.
The German crowd members there cheering for India when they realised that they were a plucky team at the final. And then the same thing with the British people at the 1948 Olympics cheering for India because they're the underdogs in that final.
Mm-hmm.
Now, quickly on to the way in which these games run. The actual score in the final was India won 4-0. India beat Great Britain 4-0 in the final. But the way in which they do it in the film is that India go down 2-0.
They have to make it really tense.
In the first half.
Yeah.
And then there's this second half comeback in order to ramp up tension.
The conflicts within the group, though, that's what's playing out in this. It isn't just that the team, they're the underdogs, they have to win. It isn't just that, it's that there's been class conflicts, but also it seems regional conflicts. The Sikhs are quite separate, but also there's the prince,
whose name is Raghubir Pratap Singh.
And what's the other character? The poor character from the same region?
He's Himat Singh.
Himat is the team's best player. Mm-hmm. He's their best player by far, but he hasn't been allowed to play. And the strategy that no one tells him about...
Just tell him!
Then you won't have narrative conflict if you just tell the characters what's going on. And there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for them not being played, even though they know they're the best player of the whole team. So he doesn't get to play at all in the tournament, and it's the last game, they're in the final. Tapan has been saving him in the rounds, when they're playing in the tables. All of the teams are watching each other's strategies. He's warned by, it's the former captain, so the captain of the gold-winning team from 36.
His name is Samrat.
Samrat, who everybody knows he's really famous as a player, he's really admired. They originally want him as captain, but he won't do it. But when partition happens, he takes some leave and he comes back to train the team. He advises Tapan to save Himat. He's your, what is it they call him? He's your trump card or something along those lines. But nobody tells him that that's what they're doing, that he's their secret weapon.
So conflict arises.
He gets really annoyed because this guy who's very, very wealthy from the same region as him, and he's grown up in poverty. They're both, centre forwards. This is how much sport things I know.
We're learning.
So they're both the same position, and it's the primary position for goal. And the prince is the one, he hogs the ball all the time.
He will not pass.
He won't pass to his teammates. He just runs rings around everybody and goes for his own glory, and he doesn't gel with the team very much. But he's made vice captain, whereas Himat is a team player, but he's also really, really good shot too. He's probably better than this other guy. But there's this class tension arises, and Himat feels very hard done by that he's not getting a go. And then it comes to half time, and there's a big blow up. There's disciplinary action because they've had a bit of a fight in a bar. Yeah, so there's all these tensions rising. It's building up to this climax, and then finally Tapan convinces the heads of the team to let him play.
And I think it's just because everyone just goes, I'm sorry.
Well, they reveal what they were doing,
Yeah.
and everybody goes, oh right, I've been a bit silly about this.
Yeah.
But nobody goes, why didn't you tell us? We wouldn't have leaked it. Come on. But yeah, it makes for a very entertaining second half then of the game.
We've got several different narratives going on at the same time, and so the one is about Tapan Das and whether he can organise this team. He's basically the manager, whether he can get this team organised and get them to the point where they can win gold for India, and he keeps promising everyone, I will get a team that can win gold for India. And then you've got what's happening to India itself, and so whether characters will live or die. And then in addition to that, we've got this conflict between Raghubir Pratap Singh and Himat Singh, which is a class conflict, where the resolution of that conflict is the last cementing together of the team. There's several different stages of cementing together of the team, and one of them is that when they're doing training, this is the Buddhist thing. There's no Buddhists on the team, but the second version of the team that one's put together after partition, they train at a Buddhist monastery.
They get very lucky,
Yeah.
and Tapan is quite a jammy beggar.
Very lucky.
He's at his wit's end. He can't find training ground. He's finally cobbled together another team, but they can't get anywhere to train. They won't give any more money. He keeps making a fool of himself because he keeps getting really drunk and messing stuff up and proving himself to be pretty unreliable, even though when it comes to the team he's really dedicated and he knows what he's doing. But he's a liability in terms of his behaviour.
So yeah, there's an extra narrative level.
Yeah.
It's not just his struggles to get this team put together, it's his struggles to become a functioning human being
Yeah.
again, because his alcoholism lasts a long time.
Yeah.
I think it's the last hurdle that has to be crossed to get the team as he wants it to be to Britain. I think they even leave without him initially. He's taken off the team and he has to be forcibly put back
he
on.
has to be reinstated because there's levels of control over the team, and isn't Mr. Waddy, he's in the United States for a while, and it's his second in command who is really trying to get rid of Tapan.
Who is called, is it Mr. Mehta? He's one of our many antagonists, I suppose, in this film.
He's one of those antagonists who also has a point, you know, so it's like he's coded as you're not supposed to like or trust me, but actually he has a point a lot of the time because Tapan's behaviour is really unacceptable. I mean, and there's the whole thing about how he treats his wife, so we'll maybe get into that in a bit too. So there's this other thing going on with his alcoholism, but yes, he goes to this Buddhist monastery trying to ask for space and board for training. Initially they say no. The leader,
The head of an order of Buddhist monks.
so their most senior member, he's taken a 5-year vow of silence. He hasn't spoken in 5 years. Of course you're set up for what's coming. Tapan is asking. There's an intermediary monk communicating on his behalf. There's a flat no, there's an absolutely no, we can't accommodate you.
And then Tapan Das says something out loud about, and he just mentions
He just
Samrat.
mentions Samrat, because Samrat's going to be the coach. So then the head of the monastery, of course, perks up and goes, Samrat! You know, just shouts his name.
Can I have his autograph? Yeah.
Yes.
Will he be coming? This is one of the 4 or 5 moments in the film where it just delivers a brief joke.
Yes.
And it did seem like someone had got the how to make a drama manual in which you have to just occasionally diffuse the tension with a joke like that. So it was one of those, I'm going to keep this light. Having a Buddhist monk
reset.
break his 5-year vow of silence, and he had to start again.
And so they move in, and it's a really nice part of the film where they're at the monastery setting it up, and then they're training. You get all the team building stuff, but also you get some of the characters complaining that they won't be eating any meat for 3 months.
yeah. I felt very self-righteous at that moment.
Yes, I think the comic moments are quite well. Within that sequence then, Tapan has managed to manipulate his wife into helping quite a lot. He goes from initially stealing and pawning her jewellery to fund stuff. and also she's pretty neglected by him. She seems okay with that because she's got her own life. She seems to be independently wealthy.
Yes. She doesn't need him.
She doesn't really need him. It seems like she's been married to him. I think she even refers to her father choosing him over somebody she preferred. So there's that hint of arranged marriages in there. I hate using this word, but she's a really sassy character, but she's not really characterised beyond her sass with him. There are moments where most of the time she seems really quite fed up and embarrassed by him, especially when at parties when he gets drunk and the song and dance numbers begin. One of them's even about him trying to get her to dance with him and she's not interested.
But when she becomes the person who's cooking for the team, or is heading up the entire kitchen at the monastery cooking for the team, then she becomes a hands-on contributor to a larger project who is a valuable member of this
but I think
larger group.
On the way to that happening, she's really quite integral. I mean, he manipulates her and it's quite a funny scene, but you know, you're finding it funny but also it's a bit problematic in that he's got the monastery secured but he's trying to get all the other stuff he needs secured, and so he fakes a phone call saying that somebody else's wife is going to help with the cooking and
provide all the money as well for the food
and pay for it all as well. And she's like, no, I don't think that person is going to do it. I think I'll be doing it, actually, is her attitude. So he manipulates her into helping, and then when they're on the way, the cart gets stuck in the mud, and then you've got a major plot point here because the cart gets stuck in the mud. Tapan is out trying to push it, trying to free the wheel that's stuck in the mud. He keeps slipping. She says to him, you need to take your shoes off because that's what is making you slip, but you'll have more grip if you take his shoes off. And so magically he takes his shoes off and he has grip from his bare feet in the mud. This is a plot point because in the final in the game, very English weather occurs. It's blisteringly hot summer and dry, and then a thunderstorm happens and it's very heavy downpours. The commentators even say stuff like, oh, we English, we're used to this, but the Indians, they can't handle rain. And I was thinking, what? Is this a joke? Because they have monsoons. Surely they're used to more rain than we are.
Yeah, the commentators refer to it as a strength of the British team, that they can play in the rain.
I thought, well, they'll show you, but it's their shoes that is the problem. And then it becomes apparent that the English team has spiked shoes and the Indian team has normal plimsolls with flat soles.
And at that moment I thought, alright, so having standardised equipment wasn't a thing at this point, it seems. You could just, like, one team could have guns and the other team could not have guns.
Spikes on their sticks, yeah.
That would be fine.
Tapan is watching this and he gets one of those memories floating in the audio of his wife telling him, you need to take your shoes off. And so he tells the team, take your shoes off so you won't slip in the rain.
I suppose it's partly symbolic because the idea is these are people who've been training in circumstances where it's all very low tech, so who needs shoes anyway? They're more in their element not wearing shoes.
If they're in bare feet.
They play the rest of the match in bare feet, even when it stops raining, and that's part of what helps them to win. It is one of those films that goes, I'm going to tell you something now that you might not think is useful, but of course it's going to be useful.
Everything's useful. Everything's
so remember this.
Flagging something up.
Flags. Okay, we'll do this. We'll do a segue. I had to look this up. So the way in which it works is when they're at the 1936 Olympics, the pre-war team, which is the British India team, their flag is the Union flag with a medal symbol in the middle to indicate that it's India, rather than Great Britain. As the team is going into play in this final, so this is just the first few minutes of the film, a couple of Indian protesters climb up on the front of the Indian team's bus, and they have the flag of what at the time was proposed to be the flag of what would be independent India by the Congress Party. So there's a party in the Indian Parliament that wants independence. And the flag is very familiar.
Yes.
It's just that the symbol in the middle isn't quite what it is now. Because the symbol in the middle in this pre-independence version that was the proposed version was a spinning wheel. Whereas the symbol in the middle now...
So otherwise it's still the same orange, white and green horizontal tricolour with the spinning wheel in the middle of the white band.
Whereas now, the Indian flag, exactly the same colours, but the thing in the middle, it's not a spinning wheel, it's not even an actual object, it's a symbol. It's called the Ashoka Chakra. It represents the eternal wheel of law, apparently, and it was deliberately picked over the spinning wheel as an indication at the point when India became independent as a preferable symbol because it suggests willingness to move into the future, whereas the spinning wheel suggests anti-modernity. That's the flag that, of course, is hoisted in the 1948 Olympics. That's the one that they all look up in pride at when they're hearing their own national anthem. Having a look, though, at the different types of flags that were proposed for India pre-independence, the one that looks very similar to the one that's used now, the one that had the spinning wheel in it, that was one of a variety of different flags that were proposed during the very lengthy period when India was agitating for independence. That flag that was hoisted by those two Indian protesters right at the beginning of the film, that's only very recently been proposed as the national flag. What happens is, this is Nazi Germany, right? German officials, they grab these two Indian guys and start beating them up. One of them throws the flag away and it ends up at Tapan Das's feet. And he quickly grabs it and stuffs it into his jacket. And at the moment when that Indian team in 1936 has won the gold and they're being lined up on the podium and we're going to hoist the British India flag and we're going to play God Save the Queen and you're all going to salute it in some way. Tapan Das, he reaches inside his jacket and he just pulls out a corner of this flag. And then everyone who's lined up, the whole team who's lined up, it starts with Samrat, the captain, sees it and puts his hand across his heart and nudges the person next to him who also sees it, puts his hand across his heart and it goes all the way down the line. So that what they're doing is they're actually just very quietly saluting the Indian flag, the one that's just poking out of Tapan Das's jacket. So the whole thing at the beginning is setting up, this will be done legitimately at some point. They won't have to do it surreptitiously. So, colonial oppressor moment number one of quite some few in this film. And of course, the times when we actually get British characters, they are quite brutal. We've got the people who are running the police force in the city in the Punjab where Himat Singh, he's drafted in. This is
against his will,
This is well before he becomes part of the national team. Drafted in against his will to be a police officer because he's wanted for the police force's hockey team. And the person who tells him to do this is a member of the white administration. And then after independence, we get lots of brief cutaways to scenes where the English organisers of the Great Britain field hockey team, they're all discussing things around a table in what looks like a smoking room. And of course, it's a conspiracy of evil people, which I suppose is fair enough. This is a film where it's quite okay for Great Britain to be the antagonists, for people from Great Britain to be the antagonists.
They play pretty dirty as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is we specifically have a commentator who talks about, what does he call it? He calls it vigorous marking. It's some euphemism for just
taking the ankles off people.
Yeah, just knocking people over or marking them in the game. The Echo's something that happens back in 1936. The German team in 1936
they're playing quite dirty.
They're playing dirty, and the ref's overlooking it, and the same thing happens in 1948 as well.
All the white people, there's no difference between them.
That's the film's implicit insistence, isn't it? Is that the Germans who are the oppressors in 1936, as the organisers of the Olympics, are replaced by the British.
That's the thing, even if you feel free and not oppressed in your own country, if your country colonises another one, you're going to make those people feel oppressed. So the way the Nazis made most of Europe feel, that's how let's face it, the English had been making India feel for 200 years, among many others.
The sheer proportion of the British Army that was made up of Indians during the Second World War, I looked it up, it's something like 20%. The British Army was Indians. Whereas if you look at other things that were still colonies at the time, it was 1 and 2%. So India was a really significant part of.
And you go back to the First World War as well, it's a similar story, and then you've got Ireland as well as part of that too. It's worth noting as well that Tapan keeps that flag doesn't go away, he keeps it, and it re-emerges at that very heartfelt talk that they all have, the argument that they're all having in the dressing rooms.
At half-time in the
final. He pulls it out again, just to remind everybody, this is what we're all united against, this is what we're fighting for. It's bigger than all of us, it's bigger than our petty conflicts between us personally. This is the whole nation we're doing this for.
There's several points in the film where that kind of thing is engaged in, a kind of do it for India appeal is made, and it does seem to just instantly work on absolutely everyone. People go, okay, I completely changed my mind about what I was doing.
I'll forget about poverty for 5 minutes.
Let's do
this. So I think there's the post-colonial thing, which is pretty massive, but then the idea of neo-colonialism, because there's a huge amount of Western influence, not just in the culture that's depicted in the film, but also the film itself and how it's made, how it's put together. And the song and dance, there's 2 song and dance numbers, both of them led by the character of Tapan, both of them concerning him being really drunk, and I think at least one of those is during the time of Prohibition, where he's got secret tea. He's smuggled as a champagne or something into the tea.
He's got posh drinks. Akshay Kumar, who plays Tapan Das, has been in over 100 feature films. He would seem to be quite the Indian film star. Being a singer and a dancer is part of it. The way that it's fitted into the narrative, and this was a characteristic that we also saw in Tigers in Dahai, it was inventive, because rather than having a story space in which it's completely fine for people to just break into singing and dancing, which gives the story space quite a fantastical feel, they create ways of doing it that don't change the nature of the story space in that way. They don't immediately go, oh right, we live in this magical story space now. So in Tigers in Dahai, it was to do with having musical accompaniments where it's not sung by the characters, but that it would be in a duet, say for example, where the 2 voices in the duet are very similar in what they're saying and the way they sound to the voices of the 2 main characters. So it's like the music's kind of coming out of their pores. And then during the ending sequence, there's a musical number as the film's coming out of the...
They're more like music videos in the film.
And then another one is... Actually, there was only those 2. There was music at other points.
There was music, yes, but
just
these
simple
are
non-diegetic.
If you consider what a lot of people would regard as Bollywood, they're the 2 that would signify that. But interestingly, again, yes, they don't necessarily fit smoothly in with the story space. You could actually read them as this is Tapan's drunken fantasy while he's running amok, you know. Because
it's only twice that we get characters singing and dancing, and they're both at social events where there's celebrations going on. The first one's to do with Tapan Das has got the team together, the first incarnation of the team together after the Second World War, and there's a celebration and people go, oh, Tapan Das, you're great at singing, sing us a song. So then he does this great big song and everyone's dancing. And then the second one is at a later celebration where he's put the second version of the team together, but this one wants to show us that his alcoholism is still happening, and so it's quite a brutal one. He's being quite grabby with quite a lot of women.
With a lot of women, and there's quite a few Western white women that make up the backing dancers that suddenly appear.
Like they're an entertainment that's been laid on for that event to entertain people, but then they end up amongst the crowd, and so they're in the group of people who are singing with Tapan Das.
Sexualized, and I think it's that second one is the one where he's trying to get his wife to dance with him. It's a bit unsavoury actually, and then he ends up in a pond with not one of the dancing white women, but a white woman who was at the social event, is quite well to do, and he ends up pulling her into this pond with him.
Because he's had so much to drink. And also his drink seems to have been spiked at that point.
Yes, there does seem to be an indication that there's a bit of subterfuge from one of the bosses, the guy under Wadia. He seems to have directed a couple of guys to spike Tapan's drinks so that he goes really off the rails, so that he can get rid of him. The songs in themselves, so even how they fit in, is a bit different to what we would consider, what we would make assumptions about Bollywood as doing, but also they're quite modernised. It's quite contemporary music and arrangements that are being used. There's that, and then how much of a Western influence is there, and maybe in terms of neo-colonialism, in terms of the film production, it's actually more how much of an American influence is there rather than a British influence, because you can't really identify what you would assume to be any kind of British film in these. Especially with the action films, it was very explodey, actiony and noisy.
Loved a bit of slow-mo.
Yeah, all the really cool stuff, making everything look really cool and slick. With this, it was aggressive, then funny, and was never really pared back, was never subtle, it was all out there.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see more Hindi films over the next couple of months, because I want to see just how normal it is to maintain song and dance numbers, but not in the standard musical form of people just do this, but to have some sort of story space justification for why people are singing and dancing.
I'd like to see more that are about the women, because we've seen loads of trailers trailers when we've been at both of these films, and the trailers we saw before Tigers in the High were really fascinating. Like there was the one about Padman, the guy who created,
a real guy,
based on a real story, this real guy, this revolutionary guy who took it upon himself to make menstrual products for women in his life and in his region.
Apparently he made a very simple machine that you can use to make your own. Apparently that was his big thing. This is a machine which you can buy for next to nothing, so that women can save masses of money on
these luxury items that we need.
Luxury inverted commas items. And of course also in some cases just be able to have them at all, because even physically getting hold of them would be difficult. Whereas the trailers we saw before Gold, they seemed rather baffling.
They were confusing. There was one that was quite an aggressive, I was coming across to me like a sexual comedy or something. It was really quite difficult to tell what the narratives could be, the tone of these films, if they're being funny or...
First one seemed to be a spy film, second one seemed to just be a sexual comedy, and no idea. I just want to park for a moment on Tapan Das's wife's name.
Yeah.
It was Monobina.
Monobina. I knew it was Mono something.
If I ever name anything, and that's what I'm calling it again.
There wasn't really enough of her. You know, there was nice bits with her. There were quite funny bits with her, quite sweet bits where she'd be really annoyed at him and then she would say, you know why, and cut off. And he'd go, I know. We love each other.
When they're both out shopping to provision the monastery, just before that, the cart gets stuck in the mud and he has to take his shoes off for a moment. We're getting another montage sequence there with music, with lyrics playing over it. And that's a remarkably common aspect of narrative cinema when you have a couple in it whose relationship you want to suggest is improving. That was another musical moment. So it was quite a musical film for a film about field hockey.
Yes, definitely. That builds as well with their relationship, because then when they're preparing the beds for the players, there's a wee bit of lovey-dovey stuff going on. There's a bit of fun time happens, or it's implied that it will happen. It's very beautifully choreographed. It's almost like a dance piece in itself, where they've got this rhythm of one rolls the mattress, the other pulls the sheet over, you know, and they've got this beautiful rhythm as they go across the beds in the dorm. At one point they get really affectionate. He lays her down and pulls the mosquito net over her.
And there's some actual kissing.
And there's a little bit of kissing, and there's an implication that they have some special time together.
I wanted to just point out that there was one moment very early on in the film, I think it's, only about 20 minutes into the film, where we see what is probably the closest close-up of Tapan Das lying in the street. He's just slept in the street after having been slung out there.
He's been thrown out.
And I've been thinking throughout the film, this is a finely sculpted pencil moustache that he's got. And then I realised it was just makeup. Maybe he had some facial hair, but he had mainly just had his moustache drawn onto his face. This was lots of very, very 40s facial hair as well in this film, which is to say very thin lines of hair. I just want to do one more thing. It's the thing with training. This film has its culminating message is, whatever your conflicts may be, they are insignificant next to the needs of your country. We get this in a lot of films. A lot of films will do a nationalistic message that says, you all need to pull together for your country. Stop thinking of yourselves as individual agents. You are part of the collective. But this film did that at quite some length, and it made it part of the drama of putting the team together. Because when they've got the second team ready, and they've got precious little time, and they're in the monastery field, and they've got to train them, the team is cliqued. So, got the people from the Punjab, people from various bits of India formed into little 2 or 3 person cliques, and they're not really speaking to each other. This is the bit when Samrat's brought in, who previously said no to being part of the team or to training them. Now he goes, yes, I will train them. And he comes in and he realises that they're not a formed team, and that's what led him and his fellow hockey players to victory back in 1936, is being part of a well-formed team. So he says, okay, everyone just put your hockey sticks down today, we're going to do something else. And he
loved that.
Perfect scene.
You could see what was coming.
I know, I was going, oh, come on. I figured it out before the characters.
Too,
He says, okay, I want everyone to pick up this huge pile of bricks here and take it to the other side of the hockey field. So individually, the team members are picking up 2 or 3 bricks each, running across the hockey field, putting them down, and then he says, all right, okay, you've done that, well done. Now, do it again. Just back and forth and back and forth. And after, 3 or 4 times...
They're dying. They're just going, oh no, we physically can't do it anymore.
And he keeps saying to Tapan Das, it's okay, just they'll figure it out in a moment. When I do teaching, I'm quite big on these kinds of situations where I go, here's the box of limitations in which you have to do a thing, just go go,
Yeah.
and I could tell you how to do it, but I'm going to let you mess it up 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And then you're going to go,
Then you'll learn.
right. And of course, the thing to do is that they should form a human chain and pass the bricks along. And that's the least effort way of getting the bricks from one side of the field to the other. And that's part of the, we're building a team here, we got to work together thing. And that's something that the team in general has to learn, but it's also what the Prince character, Raghuveer Pratap Singh, has to learn, because he's the one who wants to, he's the centre forward who just wants to score every time he gets the ball, and he won't pass. And Samrat tells him this story about the game he's most proud of, which is the game where his team only won 1-0. And he didn't himself score a single goal in that game. And it was a game where the other team had realised that he was very good. And so they surrounded him with other players. He had, say, 4 or 5 people around him. He just kept these people occupied so that his fellow players could do the work. And he said he was so proud because what he did at one point was he managed to get the ball away out of this circle of other team players.
Yeah, they were all blocking.
Circle of people blocking him out to one of his other team members who then scored.
Yeah.
And that's the model. And it takes Raghuveer a long time.
The whole film.
To get that message, he has to learn
really
a bit of passing.
Gets it.
Well, one of the things in the second half of the final is that one of the something has worked moments is that he passes to Himat so that Himat can score. So there's some passing going on.
And they pass to each other, and he goes, "Oh, actually, it's quite nice.
Yeah.
Could have been doing this the whole time."
I thought the team building had actually happened before they went to the Olympics, but no, it happened during the Olympics.
The final of the Olympics.
That's how extreme the tension is. I thought it was a great bit of the film, and it was a way for the film to lay out this highly nationalistic message. Now, of course, to be part of a collective is not necessarily to be part of a national collective. There are different sorts of collectives. I like that idea of a film which says it doesn't cost you anything as an individual to be part of a group.
Yeah.
In fact, it can benefit you as an individual to be part of a group, to cooperate.
Part of a quite diverse group as well.
Even though the way of grouping the film was so very keen about, which is nationhood, was itself the ideology which propelled the British administration to partition India at the same time as giving it its independence. What they thought would be the best thing to do would be, okay, these people want to have their own representation. These people want to have their own representation, so we'll just give each of them a country. And splitting this group that was an administrative unit into 2 separate countries, which subsequently became 3.
Because that works so well with Ireland.
Yes, indeed. That's not to say that the right thing to have done would have been to have created a single country called India, because that would still have borders, and at its borders it would still have enemies.
I think it's important to note, just that a lot of the characters actually call India Hindustan as well, so I think that's a whole other aspect of this that muddies the waters.
And that's even before partition. They call it Hindustan. They say this is a Hindu country, which would be the same thing as you or I calling Europe or the UK or the British Isles Christendom, which we wouldn't do because that's not the way nationhood does or should work. It shouldn't be theologically organised at all. Maybe it's one of these words that's been emptied out of pre-existing meaning, such that it's just a nickname for India rather than conveying some sense that India is a Hindu country. India is, as far as I'm aware, a secular nation.
And even the film demonstrates how varied people's beliefs are and their customs.
There is a degree of Hindu nationalism in India, but this film seems to be against that form of nationalism, at least. Against that idea that there should be such things as state religion. Just
more like these things can coexist. The Sikh members of the team are invaluable.
Actually, the film seems quite strategically to go, this partition was about pitting Hindus against Muslims, and we're not going to give either of these groups the position of being the best players in the team. We are going to set both of them aside for that particular pride of place, and we're going to give that to 2 Sikhs of sharply different economic backgrounds. And so there's this, we've acknowledged it so far, but let's point it out quite overtly. There is this, we're going to pile in as many different types of citizen of India as we can into this. Even in the final, when Pakistan's now a different country, some of the people who used to be in the Indian team are now playing on a different team. They still have, as soon as they arrive, there's this shaking of hands and hugging, where what they seem to be expected to do, this is where the scene seemed to start at least, this is where they're in Great Britain, they're having a meet and greet between the teams. It seems the way it's supposed to happen is that the Pakistan and India team are supposed to walk past each other without acknowledging that they exist, but then actually what they do is handshakes and hugs. There's no antagonism.
And these were people who were good friends and colleagues before. Their countries were ripped apart from each other.
Must agree that partition, given what I know about it at least, because I think something like 1 million people died in partition, must agree that that was a very bad thing to happen. I also must agree with the
Certainly
film
the
that,
way it happens,
yeah,
and there's no democracy in it yet.
and must agree with the film's impulse to explore the benefits for the individual of being part of collectives. Love all of this stuff. But it is also still a highly nationalistic piece of cinema, which if I saw the UK equivalent of, I'd laugh at. I go, this is a kind of hackneyed, simplistic idea about the sacredness of nationhood. I'd be sceptical about it.
Yes, but this part of the world that we're in right now, it hasn't been through or been put through, not for 1,000 years, what India and Pakistan were put through by this country. So it's difficult to,
Yeah.
I think you just have to try and see it from the other side. Like, it's a different form of nationalism when it's about taking back control of something. This is a country that has been in control for a very long time and has exerted control over other parts of the globe for a very long time. If you're the country that's taken some of that back for yourself after hundreds of years of colonialism, colonial rule, I mean, I think it's understandable that you're trying to find your own identity. I mean, I don't know enough about India. I can really only speak from my own experience being on another island that has been colonised by this one. The mixed identity, the sense of placelessness and rootlessness that gives you. I think it's very natural for the human to try and understand what they are and the world that they're in and the place that they're in. Identity is so much a part of you if you've been colonised, because you don't know what your root identity is necessarily. If that makes sense, coming from that perspective, I understand why they would feel such a sense of attachment to a national identity when you haven't been allowed to have one and you don't know. It's such a small part of the film, but the Anglo-Indian ones, because you wonder, well, how diluted by white Western genes do you need to be Anglo? Is it one ancestor somewhere? Is that enough to just pass down a name? Were women married off to white men or something to achieve this?
You have to go all the way back to the 18th century. We are talking about rather rich white men who would move to India and deliberately, specifically take Indian wives. As to whether there was choice involved, I've always assumed there was. But then again, economically, choices rolled back all over the place in that relation.
But even in the film, there's the strong implication that the main character is in an arranged marriage and they just get on with it.
I suppose nationhood, it means many different things according to circumstance, because we're living in a nation where, at least up until recently, we were starting to get completely okay with that nation being an administrative unit in a larger body. Maybe that was something that we're all getting so very okay with, because the major nations in Europe, up until that point, none of them had lived under the yoke of another nation for half a century. Whereas, say, Catalonia, which has just recently asserted its independence, nationhood is something that they very much want, because it's something they feel they've been deprived of.
And then you get the individual stories caught in the middle of that, with the likes of Catalonia, with the likes of Ireland, and I dare say with India, Pakistan. People get ripped away from a country and a national identity that they feel that they have because of a majority feeling. They haven't got much choice. I mean, the Catalonia one's very problematic because they weren't allowed a legal vote, but people were intimidated into not voting. There was no side against independence. There's no arguments happening because people were intimidated into not giving them. There were a lot of people who feel like, I am both Catalan and Spanish and I'm European. I feel that I am all of these things. Like my identity, I'm British, I'm Irish, I'm Ulster, I'm European, I'm all of those things.
Spanish?
Honorary Spaniard.
Actual Spaniard.
I think it may be in a body that wants to be in the Mediterranean because I'm already freezing and there's 10 more months of this. I can't cope already. It's only August and I'm already too cold. For India and Pakistan, and you see this in the film, actually it's emerging in the politics going on in the backdrop of the film, where people don't want to be ripped away, but they have to stay in one place or another for their own safety. They can't travel anymore the way they could. They can't express who they are anymore the way they could. They're not welcome in a country they feel is their own. When that happens to you and you think, well, okay, I'll just go and be this other thing because they want me. It's very difficult. I think if you've been born into a legacy that hasn't had to think about those things, then it's difficult maybe for you to see, but I can get it. I can see, because identity is such a huge issue where I come from, is your sense of belonging to a nation. It's huge.
It just struck me that this, concentrating on India having won the field hockey Olympic medal before the war, twice before the war, and then winning it again afterwards. I suppose the implicit message there is India's an awesome nation, and even at a point when it was part of an empire, it was already a more awesome nation than the nation that was at the head of that empire.
That's how it works though. You're keeping down the people. This came up when we talked about Get Out as well. It's you're keeping down the people who are clearly better than you, because they're better physically, they get stuff done. So you keep them down, you keep them stupid, you keep them working for you, you don't let them believe that they can be anything other than your servants. That's what they're born to do because of their funny coloured skin and their silly voices or whatever arbitrary reason you are led to believe that they're lesser human than you. It's a similar thing. Slavery by another name.
The film was brave to acknowledge that independent India was a less tolerant nation for a bit. Having those sit-down conversations with people going, it's time to leave. I cannot remain in this nation. Because what that implied was things were better previously, even though that meant things were better under imperial rule, at least better in that one regard of no inter-community violence. And so the film's open about the idea of India being something that had to be built through a lot of effort after independence, rather than something that through its imperial rulism just automatically became this highly coherent country. And I suppose the film is still going. India's incomplete without Pakistan.
And you think, well, it's a relatively young country, and it's a very old country in one sense, and a very young country in another.
What was put together into India by the British was a set of dozens of independent kingdoms, monarchies. One of our characters in this film is a prince. He's a member of a royal family of an area of the Punjab, which is still living in quite a lot of luxury, even though it doesn't have its power anymore. So there's an acknowledgement that there is this whole set of monarchical dynasties. And what are they? They're Maharajas or they're Nawabs. They're lots of different levels of ruler all still existing. And actually, even now, a lot of people still maintain these statuses as being part of royal families. Where India is not that 18th century thing throwing off its shackles, India is a thing made by the British. Even that's implicitly being acknowledged by this film. Let's just mention for a moment the just taking off all of his clothes scene. Because Raghuveer, to show that he's a really generous prince.
It's the only redeeming thing about him.
Yeah, and it's completely out of nowhere and it's not in line with anything else that he does. But just after he's been headhunted by Tapan Das, he's driving Tapan Das back to the station in his own car, and on the way there, Raghuveer sees someone sitting next to the road, stops without explaining what he's doing, walks over to this beggar who's sitting at the side of the road, takes off all of his clothes except for his underwear, gives them to the guy sitting on the side of the road, gets back into the car and drives off, and that's it. That's the entire scene. None of that characterisation is picked up on later on. This idea of him being this benign, benevolent ruler, none of that. So I do wonder how many different edits that script had gone through and whether that one was just accidentally left in.
Yeah, because there's no other hint of him being mildly humanist in any way other than that.
So I just wanted to get the naked scene in before we wrap up.
Yeah. I think we're ever unfolding lots of different issues and things that it's nice actually to go to different places in the world, and I think this is probably the first non-Anglophone film that we've discussed on the recordings.
Because we didn't do one for Tigers in the High.
We didn't do one for that.
Why did we not?
We didn't do one for The Spirit of the Beehive either when we watched that. We do watch quite a lot of films in all different languages. I think partly because we're concentrating on subtitles, it's difficult to take notes. So and we're geeks about taking notes during films. So this one actually I think we've done quite well, everybody, because we saw this film days ago and you took a few notes in the interval.
Took about 100 words of notes,
and I jotted a few things down this morning, but other than that we have not done this with notes.
High fives around.
So we're totally awesome. We're not that old yet.
Yeah.
Our brains are still working a bit.
We'll do these again because they're fun. These are films from outside of the various sorts of national cinema we're used to watching, various sorts of storytelling traditions we're used to watching, even though they overlap with them so significantly.
You can be part of the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, where we welcome suggestions for future topics and guest speakers. Please support the podcast on patreon.com. Many thanks for listening and supporting. Catch you next time.